Growing up through war, love, and loss, a memoir for her family. To my children: Michael, Brenda; Edna, Janet; Marie, Margaret; Jeannie; Harry, Patricia, Tracy. Introduction. Elsie May Batterbury was born on July 4th, 1928, in the coastal city of Portsmouth, England. Raised during a time of great change and uncertainty, her life would span nearly a century filled with family, resilience, and deep love. Through the trials of war, the joy of marriage and motherhood, and the sorrow of personal loss, Elsie's story is one of incredible strength and enduring spirit. This memoir is a reflection of her memories, written for her children, grandchildren, and future generations. It captures the essence of who she was: a loving mother, a loyal wife, and a woman with a heart full of devotion and courage. Her words will live on, just like her love. Reading through yet another chapter of yet another book, I stopped and stared openly at the page. It made me realize that over the years, I must have spent many endless hours spanning over the pages. Page after page, chapter after chapter, book after book. Josephine Cox and Catherine Cookson have kept me company for many years. As an avid reader myself, I know and understand only too well how anyone can pick up a book, especially one with a good front cover, and read a few pages and know it will give many pleasurable hours of reading. It was on one of these occasions that I was sitting reading and talking to my youngest daughter, Tracy, that she made a comment. I thought about what she had said to me. I then pondered on what she had said, then said, "Could I? Should I?" Yes, I can. I can give you all an insight into my life, the way that I have seen it, the way that I have lived it. I hope this is my story. I hope you will, of course, love and cherish this. This is something that you can read over and over, just like a good book. I dedicate this to my children, to you, my child. I have had a beautiful life, a loving life, with all of you. Without your love, I would have had no real purpose in life. This is not, of course, my whole life story. There are still years of my life to come, but for now, I will say, this is my life. These are my memories. This is my love to you. My early years. I was born on July 3rd, 1928, American Independence Day. A great day to be born, if you happen to be an American. I was given the name Elsie May Batterbury. Batterbury was the surname of my father, William. It is here I take you back and give you an insight into my background. My mother's name was Edna Beatrice Moss Townsend. She was born at Castle Cornet in St. Peter's Port, Guernsey. The year was 1887, and the day was Christmas Day, 25th December. What a day! It was freezing cold outside. My mother's father was in the British Army. He was a Ceylonian, born in Ceylon. His father was also in the army. My grandfather joined the army when he was very young. He was then posted to Halifax, in Canada. It was there that he met my grandmother. They married a while later, but had to start their married days in the army's married quarters. My grandparents' first child, Ethel, was born 11 months later. 2 years later, they moved to Bermuda. Their second child, Clyde, was later born there. They were later posted to Plymouth in England. The first visit that they made whilst in England was to see his parents. They owned their own public house, which was situated somewhere in Yorkshire. They stayed there for a short while, and then returned to their new base. They were then posted to Guernsey. It was there that my mother was born. My mother was one of 5 children. My grandparents had 4 girls and 1 boy in all. Their names were Ethel, Grace, Elsie, and of course Edna. Sadly, they lost their only son, Clyde. He died while they were away in Mauritius. It was thought at the time that it was some sort of poisoning. Later, they also lost Grace at the tender age of 3 years. My grandparents were then posted to Portsmouth, and it was there that they settled down. It was probably not the most exotic place, you may wonder, after all the beautiful places they had visited. Some of these included India, Canada, Mauritius, Bermuda, and Guernsey. My mother and the rest of her family were all raised in Portsmouth. It was here that she was to meet my father, William. The year was 1910. She had bumped into this certain young man, by the name of William Batterbury, on her way home from school. She was just 13 years old. They began to meet up after school every evening after that. Sadly, his parents moved to a new town, and my parents were not to see each other again for some years. It was during the First World War that my mother was out enjoying an evening at the Clarence Pier, where she once again, by sheer coincidence, bumped into William. He later walked her back to her sister's house. She was staying with her sister that night, as her husband was doing a night shift in his Navy base. After that, the pair of them became inseparable. They courted each other until they married on the 21st of October 1916. My father had joined the Navy. On the 31st May, his ship called the Sparrow Hawk was engaged with other ships in the Battle of Jutland, and the ship sank like many others. He was a survivor and returned to the barracks. My mother gave birth to a son called William. The year was 1918. Their second son was born in July 1920. My father was then invalidated out of the Navy. In the years that followed, my parents had 5 more girls and 2 boys. In all, there were 9 children: Louis, Dennis, Edna, Joyce. Then along came Jeanette, and last of all, Brenda. I was born not long after Joyce. Childhood memories. I was born inside a small house in Rudmore, Portsmouth. However, we soon moved to our new home, which was 47 Hope Street. It was a much larger house. It had 3 bedrooms, a parlour, and a toilet at the bottom of the garden. On a very cold day, this would often leave me with a bright red ring on my bottom. We were a very happy family. Some of my fondest memories include my 2 eldest brothers, who would get up very early in the morning and catch the ride into town, make their way to the beach and hitch up our tent. The tent was for the family to use as a changing room. My parents would make us a meal, consisting of boiled potatoes, cold meat, salad, and salad cream. After it was all neatly packed into Mother's basket, we would all have a nice walk to the beach. We would stay there late into the afternoon, and then we would go back home. One of the saddest days that I can recall was the 26th of November, 1932. My brother Louis died. I can still see him laid out in the parlour. He was dressed in a white robe. I can remember some of the games we got up to. Once, when it was raining, Louis and myself went upstairs to play. We noticed that the drain pipe outside our window was overflowing, so we opened the window and began to catch the rain. We were so busy laughing our heads off that we didn't hear our father come into the room. He caught us both hanging out of the window. This was followed by a good spanking, so we thought that it was best not to play that prank again. My father was a hard-working man. He drove a large truck. He had to make deliveries to factories and dockyards. He would either collect or drop off scrap metal. We were not wealthy, but we were quite well off. To have a decent wage in those days was a rare thing. It gave you a warm feeling, a sense of belonging. We had very good meals. We would have a lovely hot breakfast, a tasty hot dinner, but at the end of the day, Mother's pantry would be looking sorry for itself. So, jam butties were the answer. Sundays were best. After 2 hot meals in one day, we were then given the choice of either cockles or winkles. Then the treat of fruit and cream. Lastly, we were all treated to one of Mother's freshly baked cakes. To be able to have so many good meals in one day was unheard of in many of our neighbouring friends' homes. At the age of 4, I started school. On my very first day there, they sent for my mother. I had fallen fast asleep at my desk. I did not expect school to be such hard work. At the age of 6, I came down with ringworm. Of all the places to get it, it was on my scalp. I had to attend the hospital. Then, all of my hair started to fall out. I became totally bald. The only good thing to come out of this was that I was able to stay away from school. I was so embarrassed about my bald head that every time I went out, my mother had to put the hat on my head. One day my mother took me out shopping. She stopped to talk to a friend, and I was getting very bored. I started to skip up and down the street. My mother was a good old chatterbox, so up and down I skipped until I stopped outside this little house-come-sweet shop. I could see all of the lovely candy bars inside. My mouth was watering. I looked up to where my mother was talking. Still she carried on. I then noticed that there was a little hole, just big enough to get my hand through. So, making sure that I didn't bring any attention towards myself, I began to skip on the spot. I then managed to fit my hand through the tiny gap and get my hand on a lovely candy stick. I will never forget that it was a white toffee bar with rings all around it. Anyway, there I was feeling pleased with myself when I heard this woman's voice yelling at the top of her head, "Edna, Edna." I began to freeze inside. I went to bed with very sore legs and no tea. I was not allowed out of my room until the next morning. I can remember feeling very ashamed of myself. As I sat at the breakfast table, all of the family were giving me the cold shoulder. I was 7 years of age by the time my hair had started to grow back. But when it did, it was beautiful. My head was a mass of curls. I was then given a new name by everyone who knew me. It was Shirley Temple. I was about the same age when I had to go into hospital again. This time it was to have my tonsils and adenoids out. Then I was to be admitted again. This time I was quite ill, with scarlet fever. However, one day the staff nurse came into my room. She was so busy chatting away to me that she left her scissors on my bedside table. Well, as you can imagine, I picked up the scissors and began to hack away. By the time my mother came to visit me, I had chopped off all of my curls. My mother broke down in tears. She was so proud of my hair, but not anymore. My curls had been neatly brushed and placed onto my table. Every Easter, we were all kited out with a new outfit, a new dress, a new pair of shoes, and a lovely, pretty bonnet. My mother would have all of us lined up, and she would stress to us that we were to take the very best care of them. She would then take me to one side and point a finger in my face and say, "Now, I'm warning you, Elsie, take care." But, try as I might, I was always the first one to ruin my dress or scratch my shoes. Growing up. My sister Brenda was born on the 7th of November, 1935. From the very first time my mother put her in my arms, I felt so protective towards her. I never let her out of my sight. I took her everywhere with me. My mother gave me the very important task of walking Brenda out in the pram. When Brenda was 10 months old, I decided to take her swimming with me, as I could swim like a fish. I was about to head for the beach, but changed my mind at the last minute. Instead, I took her to the mud yard. This was just as the phrase describes, a yard filled thickly with mud. It was a place where all of the local children would go. They would wait for the soldiers and sailors to come along here, and the men would throw money into the mud. The children would then dive in to retrieve the pennies. Only the poorest children would do this, as the others weren't too keen. The poor kids saw this as a source of income for their needy families, and the men saw it as some sort of entertainment. Off I went with Brenda, but realized this was going too far. So, instead of actually going into the mud yard, I took her to the side pool. This was where the dirty, muddy children would wash off. I sat Brenda on a side plank, then began to have a swim about. I was really enjoying myself when suddenly, from the corner of my eye, I saw the baby fall over into the water. I got out of the pool with Brenda and immediately began to worry about the state of her clothes. I knew that my parents would be angry, so I walked her all the way to the beach, where I stripped off all of her clothes and laid them out to dry. Later, when I got home, my mother began to question me as to why she felt damp. I told her that she had fallen into the sea. It was many years before they found out the truth. Another time I can recall was when I was still away from school. I had my parents' permission to go out to the park. I was almost there, when out of the blue, a little boy ran straight in front of me, right into the path of an oncoming train. I ran over to see what I could do. I was explaining what I had seen. I then made my way to the park. I returned home later that day and was busy talking to my brothers and sisters when I looked up to see my mother walk into the room with the policeman. She told me that he wanted to talk to me. In sheer fright, I jumped up and ran for the door, then into the garden toilet. I bolted the door and refused to come back out. After all of my tears, my mother explained that he had only come to thank me. I was only 10 years of age and sitting at my school desk when my teacher told the whole class that there was going to be a war. He then went on to explain that we were all going to be given a gas mask. We were to wear them everywhere we went. I ran all the way home to tell my mother. Unknown to me, my mother had been out to buy a special one for the baby's pram. So, there I am explaining to my mother that we were to carry these masks everywhere we went when she said to me, "Look, Brenda has one too." I took one look as this big metal box covering her pram and said to my mother, "I hope I haven't got to carry that thing around with me everywhere I go." My mother laughed her head off and then went on to explain that my gas mask was a small one that you put around your face. Soon afterwards, I was issued with my own mask. I can remember thinking how awful they were. World War II broke out on 3rd September 1939. The war years. The very first time that I heard the sirens go off, I jumped up from my chair and hid under the living room table. My heart was thumping, and I was in a right panic because I couldn't get my gas mask to go over my face. Luckily, it was a false alarm. Things were quiet for quite a while. In 1940, my parents moved again to a new home. We had spent 10 years in our old home. We moved to 53 Kilmerston Street, Fratton. This house was really nice. It had 4 bedrooms, a kitchen, living room, a scullery and a greenhouse, but again, no bathroom. We did, however, own a tin bath. Then my father made a wonderful decision. He was going to have a bathroom built into our scullery. What bliss it was when it was finally finished. There was an air raid shelter just around the corner from where we lived. Every evening, everyone would make their way to the shelter. It held around 200 people. We never waited for the siren to go off. It would go off at 6 o'clock to let people know that it was time to attend. One evening, we were on our way to the shelter. When the siren came on, we all began running. I got to the door of the shelter and gave my name. Everyone had to do this as a precaution, in case it was bombed. They had to keep records of the number of deaths. Once I was inside, I waited for my parents, but I couldn't see them coming in. Then I heard this almighty explosion. I then saw my parents. I was ever so glad. When we got back home, the shock of the blast had blown the windows of our house right out. The war began to have its effect on me. One night, when we were at the air raid shelter, I started to sleepwalk. I got up and walked over to an old lady, and I then proceeded to undress her. Goodness knows what she thought of me. Another time I was at home, when I decided to climb out of my bedroom window. After that, my mother took me to the doctors. I was to be kept off any kind of fluids at night. In August 1940, my father built his own air raid shelter. It was right at the bottom of our backyard. Inside, he put us up some bunk beds. It was much cozier and made it feel more like home from home. At tea time, we would all make our way to the shelter, oil lamps in our hands, water bottles under our arms, and a snack to eat. I also took up a hobby, knitting socks on 4 steel needles. In December, that very same year, the house we had left only months before was bombed out. It was hit by a plane. I don't know if it was one of our planes or the enemy's. It was carrying bombs at the time, so as you can imagine, the whole street was taken with it. Most of my friends were killed that day, including my best friend, Betty. She was 12 years old. Her mother, father, and grandfather were also killed. Her brother David was saved, but he was left crippled. I can still picture them. They were a lovely family. The memories of that blast will stay with me forever. The army and rescue services were searching for bodies days later. I had to go and see for myself. So on Christmas Day, I took a walk around to see what had happened. My most vivid memory was seeing all of the Christmas decorations dangling from bits of debris, with baubles and paper chains hanging from half-standing walls. It was one of the most depressing moments of my life. A short time after Christmas, my brother and myself were evacuated to the Isle of Wight. We stayed with a married couple by the name of Mr. and Mrs. Robinson. They were really nice people. We were then supposed to have been evacuated to Australia. My sisters Joyce and Jeanette, along with my brother Dennis, should have gone to Canada, but things got so bad that all ships carrying passengers were stopped from going. Too many lives had been taken trying to cross the water. Things got so bad that my father stopped us from going anywhere by foot. If we wanted to go anywhere, he would use his works truck. Sometimes he would take us all up to Weimering Hill. This hill was so high up that you could see the whole of Portsmouth, including the harbour. On a clear night, you were able to see all of the ships and cargo freighters. It was a beautiful sight. We were leaving there one night, coming down the hill, all of us busy talking away when my father suddenly braked. We all shut up. There, only inches away from the front of our truck, was the biggest crater that I had ever seen. A bomb had been dropped while we were at the top of the hill. We drove home in silence. When we arrived home, my granddad was waiting at the front door. He told us that his house had received a direct hit from a bomb. He came to live with us after that. I was to be evacuated again, this time to Bournemouth. I was there for 10 months. I was very homesick. When I came back home, I started going back to school. I only went half days as there was not enough space for all of the children to go at once. Most of the schools were either completely destroyed or only half standing. All of the kids were very happy with this situation. One day I was on my way home from school when the sirens started to go off. I now fully understood what that meant. The enemy was about to attack. In sheer horror and complete terror, I decided to run for home instead of the shelter. What I saw next was to plague me for many, many years. I saw a young woman running towards me. In her arms was a tiny bundle. It was so drenched in blood that I could not make out what it was. As she approached me, screaming and begging for help, I realized that it was her baby, but it was already dead. Another frightening episode was when I went to the open-air Lido swimming pool. I was happily playing about when the sirens went off again. This time I did not rush myself. I decided to take my time. I was getting tired of this by now. Anyway, the sirens carried on, so I got out of the pool and got myself dressed, but when I looked up I got the fright of my life. There were waves of planes flying over my head. I began to run. I ran all of the way to the nearest shelter. The planes were dropping bombs all around me. I could actually see the machine guns hanging half out of the planes. The bullets were ricocheting off the rooftops. I got to the air raid shelter and pounded on the doors. They couldn't hear me for the noise of the planes. Eventually, they heard me and let me in. But once I was inside, I couldn't move, let alone breathe. When I left the shelter, I started my way back home, but there was to be another 2 air raids. I eventually got to my street, but it was getting late. I recall walking up to my house, then seeing my mother running to me. She was carrying a tea towel. She had been so worried about me, as she didn't know where I was. Then, one Saturday afternoon, my sister Joyce and I were sitting at the kitchen table. We were arguing about who was going to stay at home to look after Brenda. We both wanted to go to the pictures to see Charlie Shenand and Peter Lorre. They were starring at the Green Picture House. We carried on arguing when our father walked in and heard the bickering. He then put his foot down and said, "That's it. Neither of you will go now." So we both sat and sulked. We both knew that when our father said something, he meant every word. I got up and ran to my bedroom. I stayed there until I heard my mother shouting. I was to find out that the very same picture house had been bombed down on the same afternoon. Every single person, men, women, young children, and babies had all been killed instantly. Some were found still sitting in their chairs, whilst others were found blown into the street. Some of the bodies were never identified. There was another disastrous night to come. The whole of Fratton Road was bombed. Everyone was killed. They continued to bomb all around Portsmouth that night. Hundreds of people died. There was a mass funeral. Hundreds of coffins were lined up ready to be taken to Eastney Cemetery. By this time the war was nearing its end. I was 14 years of age. Young adulthood. I left school at 14 years old, and my first job was working in a corset factory. I had to put the binding inside corsets and bras. I had a very large bust, but I never wore a bra. I thought that they were disgusting to look at, so I did not wish to wear one. My first boyfriend was Ronnie Mayle. We went out for a few months. Then I finished with him. I got fed up with him. Then I met Eddie Halliday. Now I liked this boy very much. We would go to the plaza to a good film. Then we would go swimming on a Sunday. One day he turned up wearing a lovely new belt. His father had given it to him. He was really proud of that belt. A few days later, his parents sent a message to me. I was to go to their house. They told me that Eddie was very ill. He had pneumonia. I went to see him and stayed with him for a few hours. I can remember looking at his hands and thinking how nice they were. I also told him what a lovely smile he had. He died 2 days later. I had a couple of dates with other boys, but nothing ever came of them. I then met a lovely sailor called Ivor Teedale. I was now 15 years old. I thought that this was true love. We went swimming and dancing together. Sometimes we would go for a lovely romantic walk. One evening I went to meet him, but he was nowhere to be seen. I was to be told that he had been shipped out. They were bound by law to keep it secret. All destinations of warcrafts were being closely watched by the enemy. Everything was guarded. He didn't have my address, or me, his. So that was the end of our relationship. I loved dancing so much that I would go at every opportunity with my best friend, Joan Kendall. We had been friends since we were both small. Sadly, she broke her leg. That put a stop to her dancing. I waited for her leg to mend. It took months. As soon as she was better, we took up dancing again. We went to every dance hall that we could get to. We even went to the American dance hall. My father was outraged when he found out. He was totally against me going to the Yanks dances. He said all types of men were in there, and that they only wanted one thing. He warned me that if he ever caught me inside there, he would drag me out by the hair on my head. He never did, though. I won lots of competitions for my dancing. My parents were very proud. I must have been a real worry to them. I was warned to be home by 9 o'clock every night, but I never arrived home until around 10 o'clock. Meeting Ralph. It was on one of these evenings that I was dancing away on the dance floor. The dance was the "excuse me" dance. This was the only dance that you could exchange your partner. You could be dancing away, and if some other person fancied a dance with you, then they would pat your partner on the shoulder and say, "Excuse me." Then you had the choice of dancing with them or not. So, there I was, dancing my little legs off, when this very dark, handsome young man walked up to me and asked me to dance. We got talking, and he asked me my name. He then told me his, Ralph Rhodes. I remember thinking that it had a nice ring to it. He went on to tell me that he was posted in Portsmouth, but he was actually from a place by the name of Stoke-on-Trent. That could have been a place in the top of Scotland for all I knew. He was lovely looking. He had bright blue eyes and dark, combed-back hair. I was hooked. We saw each other every night after that. One night he walked me all of the way home, right to my front door. We were late as usual, but I didn't care. We were standing in the door, kissing and cuddling, when suddenly the front door swung open and my father appeared. He began shouting and yelling abuse at Ralph. He was giving him a lecture about the time. I had had enough, so I screamed at my father to leave him alone. My father took no notice, so I told him that Ralph was a boxer. My father took one glance at Ralph and then said, "More like putting boxes on a shelf, you mean?" Well, I was so embarrassed I could have fainted on the spot. I was dragged into the house by my arm. I ran upstairs and cried my eyes out. I thought that I would never see him again. The following morning when I saw my father, he told me that I couldn't go out that night, and that I was to stay in, and that I was to put a complete new set of buttons on his works waistcoat. This was my punishment for the cheek that I had given him. That night my parents were going to a social evening, so as soon as they were out of the front door, I dived for the button box, and more or less threw the buttons onto his waistcoat. I then ran upstairs, raided my mother's wardrobe and grabbed a pair of her high-heeled shoes. Then I got myself all dressed up to go and see Ralph. I made sure that I was in well before they were due back in the house. The next morning, we were all sitting at the breakfast table. No one said a single word to each other. Then my father stood up and grabbed the waistcoat from the back of the chair. He put it on. Then, as he bent down to fasten his boots, every single button popped off. They fell off one at a time. He knew that I was a good sewer. He gave me such a piercing look that I nearly had a heart attack. He then yelled, "Right! That's it, Elsie. You can stop in tonight and every other night, until you can do the job properly." That night I stayed in, and made sure that every button was sewn on tightly. I would have died if I had to stay in another night. Ralph was in the hospital blues. He was in hospital with a poorly finger. He was allowed out, but only on certain nights. This was because he was serving in the army. On the nights that he wasn't allowed out, he would climb over the high wall that surrounded the hospital to see me. We would spend only a short time together, then he would have to climb back over the wall. It was on one of these evenings that I had gone down to meet him, that I waited by the wall. Then I heard this mumbled noise. It was Ralph scrambling over the wall. He then turned to see me. I knew there was something strange about him, but I couldn't figure out quite what it was. All I could remember thinking was how strikingly handsome he looked. It then clicked. I noticed that he had grown a mustache. Anyway, we had half an hour together, kissing and cuddling the whole time. We parted. I then made my way home. I thought that it was best to call into the ladies' toilets. I came out to wash my hands and to take a look at the state of my hair. I got the biggest shock of my life. My whole face was completely black. There were smears of fingerprints all over my neck and cheeks. I had to smile to myself. His so-called moustache was actually boot polish. The smile soon disappeared, and I made my way home. Ralph's fingerprints were all over my nice new blouse. They were in places where they shouldn't have been. My mother saw the funny side of it, though. On another occasion, I took Ralph home to see my family. My parents were out, so we waited for them to return. My father had a good old chat with him. Then my mother decided to point to all of the family in turn and tell each of their names to Ralph. I could feel the blood rising in my cheeks. So, before she got to my turn, I shouted, "And I'm Elsie, and I'm 16 years old." I was glaring so hard at my mother that I thought that my eyes were going to pop out. My mother pursed her lips together, then looked at Ralph and said, "Oh, no, she's not. She is only 15 years old." Once more, my heart dropped. I had told Ralph that I was a year older because I knew that he was a lot older than me. He was, in fact, 8 years older than me. That was such a lot to me. He seemed so mature. This time I was certain that he wouldn't want to see me again. He told me not to be silly and that he would see me soon. So, one night I walked to the hospital to meet him. I waited and waited. I returned home heartbroken. My mother sat me down and told me not to worry and things would turn out fine, and started to put my hair in ringlets. She piled it all on the top of my head. When the weekend arrived, I went to visit some of Ralph's friends on the same ward. I spoke to George, his army pal. He had had his leg amputated. George went on to tell me that Ralph had been posted to a place by the name of Hammersmith, Islington, near London. I was heartbroken. Then I received a letter from him. I was over the moon. We wrote to each other nearly every day after that. I could be sure of a letter almost every day. Once a week I caught a train and would go to London to spend time with him. I did this for quite a while. However, one day I received one of his letters, and with the usual enthusiasm I began to read the letter. What a shock I got. The letter that I was reading was addressed to a young lady called Peggy Parks. Ralph had been two-timing me all of that time. He had made the very big mistake of sending me her letter. The letter he wrote to me was obviously posted to Peggy. We both got a shock, but nothing like the shock that Ralph got when we both wrote back and told him what he had done. It still makes me laugh now when I think of him opening both our letters. Can you imagine the look on his face? He must have been shaking in his army boots. He had been engaged to Peggy. She was outraged. She wrote to Ralph and told him that it was all over. Poor old Peggy. He must have had many sleepless nights over us. Poor Ralph. I then received a letter of apology from Ralph. I forgave him, then we started to write to each other again, but I warned him, if he did it again, then that was it. He promised me faithfully that he would never two-time me. I often wondered if he did. Nothing surprised me with Ralph Rhodes. He later asked me to go up and meet his parents in Stoke. So I travelled all of the way to Stoke and stayed with his mum and dad. I stopped for a whole week, then returned back home. I then travelled to London one more time to see Ralph. I will never forget my return. I made my way back home, but there were hundreds of men, women, and little kiddies everywhere. They were all singing and dancing. Some were crying. I walked past the Guildhall, and there was a couple being sick. Yes, the war was over, at last, finished after 6 long years, 6 years of complete worry, fear, and heartache. It was May 1945. We were all over the moon. Ralph and myself decided to plan our marriage. We were to be wed in the following year, 1946. Marriage. To get money, saved for the wedding, I started work on a fairground. I worked there for about 6 or 7 months. One evening I was at work, when who should walk up to me but the man who I had fallen in love with before I had met Ralph? Well, my heart began to thud like mad. He then asked if he could take me out. I told him I was to be married the following month. He actually begged me not to marry Ralph. My head began to thud, and I felt so confused. I didn't know what to do. I knew that I still had feelings for him, but Ralph and I were in love too. The banns had been read, the cake was all ready, and the dresses were all waiting to be collected. My sister had paid for the cake. My brother Arthur had paid for the flowers. My brother Bib had paid for the cars. My parents had paid for everything else. We were married on the 9th of February, 1946, at St. Mary's Church. It was a beautiful day. The sun actually came out to give us its blessing. I cried as I walked down the aisle. My father kept making jokes about everyone as we walked towards the front. The tears eventually stopped. My sisters, Edna and Joyce, were my bridesmaids. I also had a 10-piece band. Later, there were about 50 guests to a sit-down meal. Then, in the evening, we invited about 200 guests. In those days, it was a grand affair. The thing that my guests enjoyed most was the drink. It was free! Well, it was at my father's expense. We went to live with my sister Edna. We stayed with her for 2 months. Then my husband got demobed from the army. We then moved to Ralph's hometown of Stoke-on-Trent. We stayed in lodgings in Lichfield Street. We then moved to a house in Greasley Road. Family life. Soon after this, my husband's grandmother died, so we moved into her house in Ward Street, Hanley. It was here that I gave birth to my first child, a son named Michael. He was a big baby weighing 9.5 pounds, and he was born on the 20th of March, 1947. Then, on the 8th of August, 1948, I gave birth to a daughter, who we named Brenda Elizabeth. She weighed 8.5 pounds. On the 24th of November, 1949, I had another little girl. I named her Edna Jennifer, and she weighed 8.75 pounds. Another child was born. This was also a little girl. We named her Janet Ann. She was born on the 28th of January, 1951. Marie Dorothy was born on the 6th of May, 1953. On Marie's first birthday, we moved to a new home. This was in Priory Road in Abbey Hulton. On January 8th, 1955, I gave birth again, and, yes, it was another girl. We named her Margaret Susan. She too was a big baby. She weighed 9 pounds. I then gave birth to another girl named Jean Angela. She was born on the 30th of January, 1959. Then, at long last, I gave birth to a boy. He weighed 8.75 pounds, and we named him Harry Samuel. I was to give birth to 2 more girls, Patricia Maureen. She was born on the 30th of March 1961. I then had my last born, and we named her Tracy Virginia. I can remember all of the older children putting names into a hat. That is how we named her. She weighed 7 pounds 12 ounces. The date was the 7th of December, 1963. In all, I had given birth to 10 beautiful, healthy children, 8 girls and 2 boys. Not long after Tracy was born, Michael went to work in the mines. He became ill so many times that the doctor advised him to leave. He then went to work in a pot bank at Ivy House, Hanley. Every Tuesday and Wednesday I would go to his works with his dinner, chips, pie, and gravy along with bread and butter. He loved that. As a young child, Brenda suffered terribly with her ears. She had mastoids, and she had to attend the hospital lots of times. Eventually, she had an operation to remove them. One day, the matron was changing the bandage around her head when suddenly Brenda started to scream and broke into tears. The matron, in her hurry to get the job finished, had stuck the safety pin in her head. I didn't half tell the nurse what I thought. Because Brenda was such a sickly child, she was sent to a convalescent home at Henchurch near Trentham. Whilst she was there, she had to attend an open-air school. The teacher there picked on Brenda a lot because she suffered with her nerves and was lacking in confidence. I would visit Brenda on a Saturday afternoon. I would have to catch 2 buses to get there. Every time I went to see her, she would cry and tell me that she wanted to come home. I would plead with the nurses there to let me take her home with me, but they would not hear of it. I would walk out of there breaking my heart. It was after I had been to see Brenda that I would go home crying my eyes out to Ralph. I told him I could not take any more, and then went on to say, "That's it. Next week she is coming home with me." The following Saturday off, I went with a skip on my feet and jump in my heart and a twinkle in my eye. My little girl was coming back with me, no matter what happened. I had written a letter to the matron explaining what I had done and why. I also told them that if they tried to take her back, they would have to kill me first. When I got to see Brenda, I told her to go and pack her things as quickly as possible and to put the letter onto her bed. In her own panic, Brenda threw her belongings into her suitcase, but forgot to pack her pajamas. She then decided to give the letter to her best friend there, Aileen. We then both ran from the building. When we got out of the gates, we ran and hid behind a bus shelter. My heart was pounding so hard that I was sure that the passers-by would hear it. Once we were on our bus, we both sat back and giggled about it. She was with me at last, safe and sound. More family memories. Another of my memories includes one of a very hot summer's day. Brenda had walked into the house and asked me if she could take the kids to the park. I was heavily pregnant at the time. I told her she could, but to be home before 4 o'clock. Off she set with the pram and some of the younger ones. Suddenly, there came a knock at my door. It was a sharp knock, and for some reason I glanced at the clock. The children had not been gone too long. My heart began to thump. I opened the door to a man and a woman. They had brought the children home because Brenda was a shocking mess. Her hands and knees were covered in blood, and all of the children were cut and bruised. She explained to me that she had put all of the little ones into the pram. They were coming down Birch's Head Lane. The pram started to drag her downhill. She could not stop it from rolling. She hung onto it with all of her strength until it finally dragged her down. It crashed at the bottom of the hill, throwing all of the children clear out. They all had to attend the hospital for treatment. When Edna was a little girl, she too had a nasty accident with her bike. She crashed it and fell in an awkward position. She suffered some terrible bruising. I will go on to say that she has never forgotten where the worst of the bruises were. Janet was taken into hospital when she was 12 months old. She was suffering with a nasty water infection. I was not allowed to go into her room and hold her. I had to stand outside her room and just look at her through the window. That was a terrible time, knowing your child was sick and not being able to comfort them. Marie, too, was admitted into hospital when she was 7 years of age. She had a nasty virus and was very sick at the time. Once Patricia was a little girl, she had her friend Leslie Lowndes went upstairs to play. What followed was Patricia falling out of the window. She suffered a fractured skull and 2 black eyes. She has always insisted that it wasn't a fall, but a push from her friend. She never liked Leslie after that. When Tracy was a little girl, she too fell out of the bedroom window. She was very lucky, though. She only suffered with some bruising. After that, we had all the upstairs windows nailed down. In 1965, my daughter, Brenda, was married. We had a cocktail cabinet in our living room which had been stacked up for the occasion. One morning, my husband, Ralph, got up early to make the coal fire. What confronted him was to shock us both. Harry, Patricia, and Tracy were all drunk as skunks. The ambulance arrived, and the ambulance men were asking us what we thought they had drunk. We were not too certain, but the ambulance men turned to me and said, "Well, it looks as though Tracy has enjoyed the whiskey." And there was her pink dummy sticking inside the neck of the bottle. They were all taken to the hospital, and they had to have their stomachs pumped. The doctor said to Harry, "The next time you have a drink, young man, make sure you have something to eat first." We kept the cabinet locked after that. In all of my children's young lives, they never knew what a holiday was like. Twice a year we went on a day trip, one to Blackpool and one to Rhyl. We went with our local club, the Suburban. Once we were all sitting at the back of the coach. We would have a good sing-song. Our favourite song was "In the Quartermaster Stores." This was a song where we all had to sing a verse about each member of the family, such as "There was Mom, scratching at her bum," and so on, until we had sang about each of us. Later into the journey, all of the children on the bus were given half a crown. They were also treated to a very welcome drink of pop and a packet of crisps. We would have a lovely day. Then back home we would go singing our happy little heads off. When my 10 children were all quite young, my husband was diagnosed with a disease which affected his spine. This stopped him from working. He did, however, do the odd spot of canvassing work with his friend. In the meantime, I took part-time work on in order to make life a little easier for my children. My children left school one by one, year by year. The girls all went to work for Royal Dalton. They became lithographers. Harry soon joined them but worked by the kilns. Michael joined the army. He was sent to Ireland. That made me very ill. When he came back, he told us some horrific stories. He left the army after 10 years of service. Tracy was my only daughter not to work in the pottery industry. She had dreams of working in a hospice looking after the sick. However, she ended up working in a fruit shop. She took the exams but failed by 3%. In 1973, my husband was diagnosed with cancer of the throat. He was eventually cured. However, it returned with a vengeance, this time in his tongue. He suffered with it for 18 months until he suffered a stroke. He was very ill for 2 weeks then. Just as things looked as if they were improving, he had a massive heart attack and died. The date was the 13th of August, 1983. After Ralph died, my youngest child, Tracy, got married. She was 21 years old and was the only daughter not to be given away by her father. My children have been wonderful to me. I have never had any kind of trouble brought my way, of any kind. Then came a very sad day for all of us, when Harry, my youngest son, was killed. He was badly injured when his car crashed. The year was 1990, and the date was the 6th of June. He left a wife and 3 beautiful boys. Their ages at the time were 7, 5, and 3 years. My daughter, Jeannie, emigrated to Australia. She moved there to live with David. She became pregnant and then gave birth to a little girl. They named her Samantha, but sadly she died at the tender age of 10 days. She was Jeannie's only child. David already had 2 children from a previous marriage. Later years. Because I had been so ill after Harry's death, and Jeannie was having to cope with not only her brother's death, but also with Samantha's too, my children decided to send me to Australia. My children all put the money together and paid for my flight. I arrived in Australia 3 days after Samantha's funeral, which was in October 1990. I stayed with Jeannie and Dave until June 1991. I then returned home a different woman who felt much better. Then, in April 1992, I got up early one morning to use the toilet. I slipped on some wet lino and knocked myself out. I came around, but I was in absolute agony. I had broken my hip. I was given a hip and femur replacement. I was in so much pain. I didn't know where to put myself. With the help of my children, I was soon back home. All of the children rallied around and gave me lots of love and care. I know that families can be close, but I know of no one who has such loving and caring children as I do. My youngest child, Tracy, came down to my home to look after me. 7 days of every week, she was there for me. She was heavily pregnant at the time, but still she took care of me. I worried so much about her own health, but she would have nothing said. She then gave birth to a little boy called Aaron. Days later, she was back to look after me. She looked after me and the baby for the whole day. Then she would toddle off home to care for her 3 other children. Tracy did this for nearly 2 years. I am now much better and have my confidence back. In 1993, Jeannie and Dave had another baby. A baby girl. This time it was a very happy occasion for all of the family. Jeannie now had a beautiful little girl who they named Jessica. It was about time that we had some good news. Once again, my lovely children paid for me to go to Australia. I was there for over 10 months. I came back home in April 1994. I went back over again in 1995 for 3 months. I have made many friends over there. My daughter, Jeannie, has been in Australia for 6 years. Her sisters and brother always keep in touch by letter or phone. One evening, myself and my family were to meet up. We were to have a family gathering. We were all sitting in the Hollybush pub when Michael announced that he was to make a speech. He made a lovely speech about how much we love and care for each other, which we do. He told us all how much we know we are always going to be there for each other, and that not many families can say that, especially families as large as ours. Suddenly, to our complete surprise, Michael said in a very formal voice, "Whose is that little girl?" We all turned around to see this beautiful, blonde-haired little girl. She was carrying a little posy of flowers. For a second, the whole room went silent, until a tiny voice said, "Nana!" The whole room erupted into cries of tears and laughter. I have never seen my children cry as they did that evening. They were hugging and kissing each other with gasps of words such as, "I can't believe it!" Jeannie was home at last. After all that had happened with regards to Harry and Samantha, having Jeannie back home was like putting the final piece of a jigsaw puzzle together. We were all together, united at last after 6 long and trying years. Jeannie, Dave, and Jessica stayed with us for 6 weeks. What bliss that was. She is now back in Australia and informs us that she would like to try for another child. I have the most wonderful children. No other mother could be blessed with such beautiful and caring children. God has given me perfect angels. You have given me perfect love. In all, I have 9 living children after the loss of Harry, 23 grandchildren, and 9 great-grandchildren. I am to have 1 more great-grand